Thank you for joining this afternoon here. Yeah, I can promise you it will be less sophisticated now. Not such complex issues like measurement invariance and interactions. I'll keep it very simple and descriptive. I want to present an analysis I did together with a team of co-authors. Linda, that's Ling, Sabina, Andres, and myself. And this is part of a larger project. My name is Rolf Friedhold, and I'm the head of the research and analysis unit of the IEA, the organization that is bringing you data from studies like TIMSS, PEARLS, ICCS, and ICLS. And with our team, we were contributing to a book that will be published, hopefully, soon, in half a year or so. And it will be about sustainability and the environment. And I will today present one part of this book. I think there will be another presentation on another book later in this session. What I will talk about is the environment and what we know about it. And I came across, while preparing this presentation, a journal which I bought from homeless people in Hamburg. I'm from Hamburg. And I must admit, it is a while ago that I bought it because the weather is not that sunny anymore at this time of the year. It's mostly rainy. But at that time, in June or so, they were discussing in this journal for homeless people issues about climate change. And they discussed that homeless people are much more affected by climate change and the heat because they cannot really protect themselves. They don't have an AC at home. So for the rich it doesn't matter so much that it's getting warmer and they may even enjoy it, but then spending all the time outside and not having the resources and means to protect themselves, yeah, that's an issue. And there's another article I read about global differences in terms of the environment. Here, climate change is devastating the global south. They're also highlighting that climate change and the issues around the environment are more affecting some regions than others. And this is actually what my presentation will be about. I'm looking at this as an educationalist, and I want to understand what we know about the environment and whether this knowledge about the environment is differently distributed across countries and within countries, across different groups. So in this presentation I will address three main questions. The first thing I want to mention is environmental knowledge. What is that and how do we measure it in TIMSS 19? The question number two is there variation in environmental knowledge within and across countries? And then the third question, can this variation be explained by other variables on country or on individual level? Okay. And I can promise you, you will see now some items that have not been released yet. So you will be the first people outside our group who will see how we measure environmental knowledge. First, very briefly on the conceptual framework. Environmental issues and the nature of science, that was a content area in TIMSS. In TIMSS we have different content areas, and in the area of science that is, for example, biology, physics, and in the old days, environmental issues and the nature of science was one of these content areas, but it was dropped for some reason and no longer reported for 1.5 decades. But then there was again an interest in this topic in recent years, and for TIMSS 19 this subdomain of science was reintroduced and it was labeled environmental awareness, a term that we didn't like so much because awareness refers to some attitudes or so. So we are using the term knowledge, environmental knowledge, throughout the presentation later. Here in 19, we must admit that the items that measure environmental awareness were, or environmental knowledge were identified post hoc. So there was a test with several hundred test items, 200 items roughly, and then the items that were measuring environmental knowledge were identified afterwards, but there was no coherent framework in advance so that the items were derived. That's just something we need to stress. That has changed a bit in the latest cycle of TIMSS, which was administered earlier this year in 23. So there, this framework existed before, and then items were derived afterwards. So I mean, that's at least what the people say. I don't know if the measure has actually changed that much. So, however, environmental knowledge was based by items in the area of life, biology, and earth science, and I will give you some examples in a minute. And then these items were grouped together, and scale scores were derived just based on these items that are supposed to measure environmental knowledge. Here some further information in grade 4. The items stem from earth science and life science. In grade 8, earth science and biology. I will now focus on grade 8. And earth science and biology are two of the subdomains that are used in grade 8 for the reporting, next to the overall science score. In grade 4, we have 33 test items referring to environmental knowledge. In grade 8, 41. And the topics covered were nature's resource use and conservation, ecosystem, independence, pollution, climate, induced habit changes and natural cycles. And I always prefer to look at individual items to understand what is measured. I cannot reveal all items that were used because some are kept confidential because this is a trend study and we want to use the items again in the next cycle, so they haven't been released yet. But here are a couple of examples so that to give you a better idea of what we measure. So here in these items, the question is, in some large cities, owners of large buildings and houses have installed gardens on the roofs. Having more gardens helps reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. And then the students have to give some examples why this is the case. They have to justify it, explain why this is the case. And so it's a constructive response items. The students formulate their reply freely and then it's scored afterwards. And this is one test item from the content domain of biology originally. Another simple item, how is planting trees beneficial for the environment? Right, 2 ways planting trees benefits the environment. There are also multiple choice items. Here, for example, there is a pond and it is not nicely blue and clear, but it is green. And here is an explanation. Algal blooms can occur in freshwater ponds when there are too many nutrients in the water, and the students have to pick the right answer. What is the issue here? Farming with a lot of fertilizers, burning chemicals in factories, using aerosol spray cans, so here the kids have to pick the right answer. Here from earth science, another example, what happens when water molecules in an ice cube, as the ice cube melts. What's happening there? The water molecules increase size, they decrease size, they move fast, they move slower. So this is actually some knowledge that that is required to solve this item, which was considered relevant. Then there are further items. I will not elaborate on everything, but I guess you get an idea on how we measure environmental knowledge in TIMSS. And all these items were then compressed into a single score, IRT score. And what you see here is what you are probably familiar with. This is this percentiles and the mean achievement in different countries, and they are ranked. And what you see is that environmental awareness varies dramatically across countries. Some countries perform extremely high on this scale, while others perform much lower. And here the highest performing country has on average almost 600 points on the Pearl scale, and this is similar to the other scales that we are using in international assessments. It has a standard deviation of 100 points, while Lebanon has on average less than 350 points, so that corresponds to 3 standard deviations. And that is huge. I mean, also for the other countries, you see a lot of variation across countries. What you can also derive from this graph is the huge variation even within countries. You see, within the very same country, for example, again, just look at Singapore on the top here, the top performer, the highest performing, the 90th percentile, gives up to 700 points, while the lowest 10% perform roughly 450 points. So even within one single country, the gap in achievement is huge. And this is now, this basically already answered my second research question, is there variation and within and across countries, and we see that yes, there is huge variation. This is not really new if you are familiar with other findings from international assessments and other content domains, but I think it's just when you think about climate change and the environment and sustainability, it just reintroduced this notion of the importance of education in this specific area. So next, I would like to investigate variation in environmental knowledge, and first I will look at the country level, and here the question is the mean scores of a country associated with other country characteristics? And what we did is then also we used different measures. I will just present you some of the findings. The first one here, what you see is the average achievement in countries to see if there's a difference between the so-called global north and global south. And what you see is here, well, there are many blank spots, so for many countries we don't know how well they perform, but still what we can derive from this graph, I think, is good evidence for the hypothesis that there are differences in achievement between the global north and the global south. We can also look at that more systematically by investigating the wealth of a country using the GDP as an indicator, and here we are plotting the mean score in environmental knowledge against the GDP per capita, and what you see is a very strong association between these two measures. Those the richest countries, they show much higher knowledge about the environment compared to poor countries. And just remember what I said in the beginning, probably there are differences in how much different countries, different people are affected by climate change and by pollution and issues around the environment. So those countries that are arguably most affected know least about it. Let me continue and look into countries, inequality within countries. You saw that there is huge variation within our countries. So what we did next was looking at each country individually, and we checked whether environmental awareness or environmental knowledge is associated with students' origin. And here we focus on 3 standard measures. One is the socioeconomic status. We compare those with and without a university degree. We look at gender, and we didn't study migration because we didn't find it meaningful, because immigration means different things in different countries in this heterogeneous set of countries. I mean, in other regards, because it makes sense. That what we looked at here was urbanicity, because we were arguing that it may be a relevant category that living in a more urban or rural area, that they may also be differently affected by climate change and other issues. So that's the category that was more popular a couple of years ago, a couple of decades ago. We are reintroducing it. So what we found is compelling evidence for social inequality in environmental knowledge. Here we see a significant gap, and you can see here the gap is also very big on average. This is 50, 60 scale points between kids from well-educated parents versus kids from less well-educated parents. So this is really huge differences. The poor or the disadvantaged kids know far less about the environment compared to the kids of better well-off families. And this is something we found in all countries, and I'm not really interested in the variation here. I think what matters most is we find it everywhere. I mean, this is, and the gaps are large, huge everywhere. Well, then we proceeded with gender differences, and there the pictures are completely different. First, note that the scale here is different. So the gaps are altogether smaller, and in half of the countries there's no statistically significant difference at all between boys and girls. Then in some countries we observe gaps, significant gaps, but it goes in both directions, and there's no clear trend. I mean, I'm not saying that there's nothing. In some countries there are significant gaps in both directions. Also something we know from previous research that is less pronounced compared to what I presented before, socioeconomic status. And then what we checked in the end was gaps between, in terms of urbanicity. And again, here we found a more consistent pattern. We observed that in more than half the countries, the kids in more urban area, medium or large areas have higher scores, and there are basically no countries where the kids in small rural areas have higher scores, but only two exceptions here. So again, here we have more clear evidence towards urbanicity. We didn't further control for the different variables in this analysis on purpose. One could of course do that, and obviously they are confounded, and the urban areas, the composition of people is that there are more rich people. I mean, this is now that we have done this analysis, I'm not presenting it today, but we found it just interesting to show this as a simple descriptive finding. Well, and then it already brings me to the conclusions. So I think I really like that Tim's has now introduced this environmental knowledge scale again. So we have now evidence on what kids in primary and secondary school know about the environment. And what we found from this initial study here is that there's significant variation, and significant, I mean, there's huge variation both across and within countries. And in line with our expectations, we found that economically poor countries in the global source, they exhibit notably lower average environmental knowledge compared to other richer regions in the world. Within all countries, there's a consistent pattern that low performance is associated to socioeconomic disadvantaged groups. And that brings me back to the introduction to this journal from homeless people, and I think that's the most important point in this presentation. First one, I think the irony here lies in the fact that the most marginalized groups in terms of countries and social groups within countries who are likely to bear the brunt of climate change and environmental consequences, they possess the least knowledge about this critical issue. And then what we close with, I think, what we derive from these findings is that we see an urgent need for action to change this, to invest specifically into that, to safeguard those marginalized groups. And we believe that this is basically a joint endeavor for both governments, educational institutions, and civil society, so that we need to develop together measures to attack this problem. Thank you very much.